14,000 crore. It's a sum large enough to sustain a nation, yet it is currently shielded by total, impenetrable silence. To understand how a figure this large vanished from the public record, we have to look at the people who provided it. These were citizens who operated on pure faith, individuals who followed every directive from their leadership with the absolute belief that their trust was being honored. Then, the pathogen arrived. In a matter of days, it wrapped around the entire nation, extinguishing the normal rhythm of life. Everything simply stopped. The streets emptied out. Markets that usually buzzed with millions of transactions fell completely silent. The physical and economic engines of the country ground to an absolute halt overnight. Locked inside their homes, the population held its breath. People sat paralyzed in front of their television screens, waiting for someone to tell them how to survive the nightmare unfolding outside their doors. When you strip away a person's routine, their income, and their physical mobility, leaving only raw fear, you create a highly specific psychological environment. You engineer a population primed to accept any directive their authority figures hand down. The leader finally appeared on national broadcasts, his voice echoing into every living room. He framed the biological crisis as a shared existential war that required absolute unity to win. He then issued a highly direct plea. He asked every citizen to dig into their personal savings and hand over whatever they could. He told them the central administration needed their personal wealth to fund the fight for their lives. The public response was instantaneous. No one paused to debate the logistics or demand a spending plan. Transferring money became the ultimate act of patriotism, a moral obligation embraced by the entire country. Retirees, surviving entirely on meager monthly stipends, gathered their cash. They took the exact funds meant for their own food and medicine and wired every last rupee to the central government. Daily wage earners, people who literally starved if they couldn't find manual labor that morning, did the exact same thing. They chose to go to sleep with empty stomachs so they could send their grocery money to the national relief effort. Look closely at the reality of these transactions. This was the most vulnerable segment of a country willfully liquidating its bare survival resources, driven by an unshakable trust that their leader would catch them. The capital continued to flood in. Transport workers and street vendors, already crippled by the rigid lockdown measures, calculated their dwindling daily earnings and willfully handed over half of their net worth. The emotional gravity of the leader's broadcast trickled down into the youngest demographics. Children smashed their clay banks, scooping up handfuls of saved coins to mail directly to the capital. Those individual coins and crumpled bills aggressively compounded. In almost no time, a staggering 14,000 crore rupees materialized in a highly centralized state account. Every single deposit was backed by a silent, assumed contract. The public believed, without a shred of doubt, that every cent of that mountain of cash would immediately be deployed to buy medical supplies and secure their safety. Eventually, the infection rate stabilized. The immediate, suffocating threat of the pathogen began to recede, and people slowly started breathing easier as the lockdowns lifted and commerce resumed. As the dust settled, the financial landscape was drastically altered. The working class had drained their emergency buffers down to zero, while the central authority now sat heavily on a brand-new multi-billion-dollar treasury. With the panic subsiding, rational curiosity took over. The public naturally began to ask for the receipts. They wanted the exact final tally, and more importantly, a ledger detailing which specific hospitals and relief programs received their money. People filed official paperwork. They utilized the legal mechanisms designed specifically for public oversight, submitting right-to-information requests to audit the national ledger. The response from the administration was absolute silence, followed by a blunt directive: stop asking questions. The government flatly refused to release the financial records. This chart illustrates the mechanics of that secrecy. The administration engineered a legislative firewall, passing a rule that declared this specific fund exempt from public audit. The connection between the donor and the data was severed by law. Looking at the expanded diagram, here is where the logic breaks down. The state already had a functioning disaster relief account, one that was fully subject to legal public audits. They deliberately bypassed that transparent system to build a completely opaque one right next to it. You don't build a secondary secret vault if your only goal is to pay hospital bills. The structural design of this new fund served one clear mechanical purpose: to legally strip the donors of their right to track their own money. The reality of the maneuver hit hard. The people had operated under the assumption that they were shareholders in a democracy, only to be handled like subjects paying tribute to a sovereign. Look closely at the mechanics of this historical event, because it is a direct mirror held up to your own political reality right now. The baseline requirement of any legitimate democratic system is transparency. Demanding a detailed accounting of how public funds are spent is a basic civil right, never an act of insubordination. Take a hard look at the systems governing you. When legal mechanisms of accountability are suddenly removed, the entire concept of your civic freedom fractures. If a governing body can demand your personal resources during a crisis, but legally penalize you for asking where those resources went, you aren't living in a democracy. You are participating in a highly choreographed illusion.